911 emergency.
I think I need to report a break-in and a murder. My wife is on the floor, bloody, stiff, not moving.
It was a 911 emergency call that began the tragic story of Shauna Tia's death. George Tia, a firefighter, was calling to report a break-in and murder at his home. He had just arrived with his 8-year-old daughter when he noticed something strange. The garage door was open. This made him suspicious, so he decided to investigate. When George went into the house, he found his wife Shauna lying on the floor in the living room, completely still, covered in blood. She wasn't moving at all. She was already dead. George quickly told the 911 operator that he hadn't seen his wife in over 36 hours. He explained he had been at work the day before and had last seen Shauna then. The police arrived, and this moment changed everything for George and his daughter. Even though George and Shauna had been separated for some time, they were still married. Now George was left to deal with the tragic loss of the mother of his child. But things were about to take a strange turn with a burglary, surveillance footage, and a shocking accusation. Let's dive into the story of Shauna's death. Shauna's last known moments were captured by a security camera at her job. On the night of September 29th, 2012, she worked as a cocktail waitress at the Palms Casino in Las Vegas. At 3:01 a.m., Shauna was seen clocking out of her shift. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. She drove back home, which was about a 30-minute drive, and entered through the garage. It was late, and she was tired from working all night. She didn't bother turning on the lights and quietly moved through the house, just wanting to go to bed. However, as she walked down the hallway toward the stairs, something terrifying happened. Someone was lying in the dark waiting for her. This person had a hammer and attacked Shauna. She tried to defend herself by raising her hands, but her attacker broke her fingers and then beat her with the hammer until she was dead. This is how George found her the next morning when he arrived at 9 a.m. He was devastated to find that Shauna, the mother of his child, had been brutally murdered in their home. The question now was, why was Shauna killed, and who was responsible? To understand more, let's look at Shauna's life and background. She was born in March 1966 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and was raised in a Mormon family with her sister and 5 brothers. The family stayed in Utah until Shauna was 12, then moved to Pennsylvania, and later to Virginia, where she went to South Lakes High School. There, she was popular, an outgoing cheerleader, and known as a girly girl. She graduated in 1984 and seemed to have a bright future ahead on the East Coast. However, Shauna missed the desert lifestyle of the West. In 1994, at 28 years old, she moved back to Las Vegas, Nevada, to be closer to her sister, Paula. Las Vegas, known for its nightlife and casinos, was a big change for Shauna's Mormon upbringing, but she felt at home there. She worked in high-end retail stores like Saks Avenue and Neiman Marcus at first. Eventually, she decided to pursue a career in Las Vegas' famous resort and casino industry. As a waitress in the exciting and fast-paced environment, Shauna was able to meet many interesting people and make a good living. A few years after moving to Las Vegas, Shauna got a job as a cocktail waitress at a casino called Fiesta. She was lucky enough to get the same job at a new casino called the Palms Hotel Casino when it opened in 2001. Shauna loved her job because it felt glamorous and exciting, and she had many close friends at work who felt like family. One of her co-workers said he never saw Shauna with a frown. She was always so bubbly, laughing and everything, and just loved working as a cocktail waitress. The work was exciting and also paid well. Shauna earned almost $100,000 a year in salary and tips, which was often given to her as casino chips instead of cash. In Las Vegas, casino chips are used just like money. On a good night, she could make $500 in tips, which would be around $850 in 2024. So for Shauna, Las Vegas wasn't just a place for partying. It was also a place for opportunities to make and spend money. She enjoyed both making money and spending it. But we'll talk more about that later. In 2002, while working at the Palms, Shauna met her future husband, George. George born in 1972, was 6 years younger than Shauna. He grew up on a chicken ranch, where he worked hard, especially after his father died when he was young. His strong work ethic carried over into his education. He graduated as the top student in his high school class and went on to attend the prestigious U.S. Military Academy at West Point. After graduating, he served in the Army Corps of Engineers, helping build schools and water systems in developing countries. However, after leaving the military, George didn't enjoy working a regular office job as a civilian engineer, so he became a firefighter in Las Vegas. George was charismatic and an all-American vibe about him. He was known for being a family man, always sending money back home to help his mother care for his disabled sister. He was always considered handsome and was even featured in the firefighter pin-up calendar. This made him even more appealing to Shauna when they first met. It wasn't long before they hit it off and began a relationship. 1 year after meeting, they had their daughter, and 3 years later, in 2006, they got married in a beautiful beach ceremony in Hawaii, just 3 days after Shauna's 40th birthday. The photos from the wedding show a happy couple enjoying their special day with no sign of the challenges they would face later. However, in 2008, everything began to change, not just for George and Shauna, but for millions of people in the United States and around the world. The country faced the Great Recession, the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 1920s. The recession was caused by the collapse of the housing market, and it greatly affected the economy, especially in places like Las Vegas, which relies heavily on tourism and casino industry. As people had less money to spend, the city was hit hard and the unemployment rate jumped to 14%. Many families, including the Tiers, lost money and had to adjust to new, difficult circumstances. For George and Shauna, this financial strain led to tension at home. George became more jealous and controlling. He began accusing Shauna of dressing inappropriately for work, even in front of their young daughter, which upset Shauna. She didn't want him saying things like that, especially in front of their daughter. He also started complaining about Shauna's spending habits, which only made things worse since she was used to making her own money and was independent. Shauna had a tough life, juggling hard work and long hours as a cocktail waitress. She spent her time how she wanted, but she was also unhappy with the man that George, her husband, had hired to do jobs around the house. This man, who was homeless, seemed to be getting help from George, but Shauna felt uncomfortable around him. She found him creepy and didn't like having him around. Over time, Shauna and George's marriage became worse. They had been together for 10 years and married for 6 when Shauna decided she couldn't take it anymore and moved out of their home in April 2012. They had a daughter, and now they had to share custody. But it was hard because both Shauna and George worked long hours. Shauna worked as a cocktail waitress during late nights, and George worked as an EMT and firefighter, which also kept him busy. As a result, their daughter spent a lot of time with George's mother, who lived nearby. Despite all this, Shauna wasn't ready to give up on her marriage. Perhaps it was for the sake of their daughter, or maybe because she had big dreams and loved the life she had with her charming husband and beautiful family. She was an optimist and believed things could still improve, so she convinced George that they should try marriage counselling. They spent the summer working on their relationship, but by early September, things started to go wrong. Shauna's townhouse was broken into. The burglars stole her wedding ring and some bathing suit bottoms, and even used her shower. The intruder left behind a pair of small boxer shorts. This break-in was frightening, but Shauna, ever the optimist, didn't upgrade her home security because she didn't believe something like that would happen again. Unfortunately, she was wrong. On the early morning of September 29th, just 3 weeks after the burglary, Shauna came home from work at 3 a.m. She was exhausted and stressed out from her marriage problems, raising her 8-year-old daughter, and the recent burglary. She didn't have the energy to be alert. Little did she know someone was waiting for her in the dark with a weapon. The attack was brutal. The injury to her head was so deep that paramedics initially thought she had been shot. It was clear that someone had deliberately tried to kill her. The police immediately thought George might be involved, since in many cases of marital problems, the husband is the main suspect. However, George had an alibi. He had been working a 24-hour shift at the firehouse, and their daughter had spent the night with her grandmother. In the morning, George had gone to pick her up, and while he was there, he discovered the horrible scene at Shauna's house. He had no way of being involved because he was at the firehouse, and the police verified the story. With George cleared, the investigation quickly ran into a dead end. There were no other obvious suspects. Police interviewed Shauna's co-workers, but they only spoke about how sweet, kind, and hard-working she was. They had no clue who might want to harm her. At this point, the police started thinking that there might be a predator in the neighborhood, specifically targeting women who worked at the local casino like Shauna. The break-in at Shauna's house now seemed like it could have been a warning or an indication of the killer's intentions. The investigators were unsure at first, but after 2 days of looking into the case, they got a lucky lead. A man named William Penn, who went by the name Big Will, came forward with crucial information. He had lived in Las Vegas for many years, working as a maintenance man at an apartment complex. He tried to live a good life and help others, including a friend called Greyhound. Greyhound lived in a tent in the foothills, a stark contrast to the bright lights of Las Vegas. Will had been helping Greyhound, who was an ex-convict, get his life back on track. One day in September, Greyhound came to Will and confessed something shocking. He told Will, "I just murdered a woman." Will was stunned. According to Will, Greyhound seemed oddly calm, even satisfied about what he had done. Greyhound admitted to hitting the woman with a hammer over and over until it broke. Initially, the police didn't believe the lead was important, as it seemed too easy to be true, but they decided to investigate further. Greyhound was known to steal food from a nearby grocery store, so the investigators went to the store with Will to see if anyone had seen him recently. Will also knew that Greyhound sometimes sold drugs at a nearby gas station. Eventually, they found him on the street, where he had drugs on him. This gave the police enough reason to bring him in for questioning. Greyhound's real name was N.L. Stevens, and he denied killing anyone. Without a confession, the investigators needed a physical evidence. They searched his campsite, located in the desert near Vegas. After hours of searching, they found a pair of bloody pants hidden under a bush. DNA testing confirmed that the blood was from Shauna, the woman who had been killed. The police used this evidence to press N.L. Stevens during questioning. They told him someone had come forward saying he had killed Shauna, even though that person didn't know who Shauna was. This tactic worked, and N.L. eventually confessed. He explained that he had hidden in Shauna's house, waiting for her to come home from work early in the morning on September 29th. When she arrived, he attacked her with a hammer. But there was still a question. Why would N.L., a homeless man, kill Shauna? Investigators looked into his cell phone and found something surprising. George Tiff, a firefighter, was listed as one of his contacts. When they asked N.L. about him, he explained that George had been paying him to do work around his house. This was a key discovery. Shauna had known George and felt uncomfortable around him. N.L. had been doing work for George, and that led investigators to suspect that George was involved in the murder. Shauna's sister Paula had suspected George's involvement from the start. When Shauna's death was announced, Paula called George. In the conversation, George claimed not to know what had happened to Shauna.
Hello?
George?
Yes,
This is Paula. Can you tell me what's going on?
Shauna passed away.
And what did they do to her?
I don't know, just laying on the floor with blood on her head.
However, Paula, feeling suspicious, later told the grief counsellor that she thought that George might be involved. At first, George was not considered a serious suspect, as he had an alibi at the time of the murder. It seemed easier to believe that N.L., a homeless ex-con, was the killer. However, the connection between George and N.L. became clearer as investigators discovered that the two had been in regular contact. Over the past month, they had called each other 87 times. They had met when they both lived on the same street, and after N.L. became homeless, George continued to hire him for odd jobs. Further investigation revealed that George had paid N.L. $600, promising more money if he killed Shauna. The plan was for N.L. to make her death look like an accident. They even discussed staging the scene, but they settled on a more direct approach, murdering her in her own home. George gave N.L. a key to her house and NL had scoped out the place multiple times, even breaking in a few weeks before the murder. They had also bought a hammer together from a hardware store, which was the weapon used in the murder. The hammer was found with a barcode matching the store's inventory. This provided damning evidence that George was involved. On October 8, 2012, the police confronted George's family with the evidence. George reacted by dropping his daughter off at his mother's house and then speeding away in his truck. He drove at high speeds, eventually crashing into a barrier, and it was believed that he tried to commit suicide. However, he survived and was later charged with his wife's murder. N.L. Stevens was also charged. In 2013, he pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against George in exchange for a deal that spared him from the death penalty. N.L.'s testimony was crucial. He admitted to breaking into Shauna's house, stealing her belongings, and later killing her at George's request. He also revealed that George had been involved in planning the murder and had even given him a signal when the job was done. George didn't testify in his own defense. His sister spoke on his behalf, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. On September 3rd, 2015, George was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. In 2017, George tried to appeal his conviction, claiming that his lawyer had been ineffective and that drugs had affected his judgment. However, the court denied his appeal, stating that the evidence clearly showed his involvement in the crime. The prosecution believed the motive was money, as George had been hiding money through his mother and had ongoing tensions with Shauna over her spending habits. In 2023, George and Shauna's daughter graduated from high school. She'd been living with her grandmother since the tragic events of 2012. The story of Shauna's murder was a tragic one, revealing the dark side of trust and betrayal. The murder of Shauna was a shocking crime that shattered a family and exposed a dark secret. The tragic story serves as a reminder that even in seemingly perfect lives, hidden dangers can lurk beneath the surface. It's a tale of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of violence. Let's hope that justice has been served and that Shauna's family can find some peace in the years to come.